Welcome to our countdown. 15 controversial 60s cartoons that were pulled from TV. These classic animated shows, beloved by many, became lightning rods. Pulled due to offensive stereotypes, shocking imagery, or political overtones. Join us as we peel back decades of pop culture history, uncovering the controversies, cultural impact, and tales of censorship. Let's begin our journey in the animated archives. Number 15. Snuffy Smith and Barney Google. Long before political correctness, Snuffy Smith and Barney Google rode the airwaves with its hillbilly humor and Appalachian caricatures. Audiences tuned in for slapstick gags and folksy visuals, but caricatures of rural mountain folk steeped in moonshine jokes began to rub critics the wrong way. The controversy centered on its depiction of backward, rural Appalachian life. Drunk, lazy, uneducated hillbillies stereotyped for laughs. Advocacy groups argued that these cartoons amplified negative stereotypes of poor white Southerners, promoting classism under the guise of harmless comedy. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, as civil rights awareness spread across all lines, not only race, but also socioeconomic status, the portrayal of hillbilly characters increasingly felt tone-deaf. Networks began to pull reruns quietly, fearing backlash if seen as reinforcing a mockery of poverty and tradition. Culturally, the show reflects its time, a period when rural humor was mainstream. It reminds us how benign entertainment can unintentionally marginalize entire communities. Scholars today cite it as an example of media's role in class-based stereotypes. The censorship history is subtle. Rather than issuing explicit bans, distribution slowed, and networks replaced episodes with more neutral cartoons. The show vanished from Saturday morning lineups, its presence fading without fanfare. By the 1980s, reruns were rare, and animation historians treat the program as a relic of a bygone era. Ultimately, Snuffy Smith and Barney Google exemplifies how even non-racial humor becomes controversial when rooted in mockery of a group's lifestyle. The pull from TV underscores the evolution of cultural sensitivity and how content once seen as innocuous can be reassessed through fresh lenses. Number 14. The Dick Tracy Show. The Dick Tracy Show debuted in 1961, offering a cartoon adaptation of the hard-boiled detectives universe. Yet the vibrant colors and crime-fighting escapades came laced with problematic character portrayals that wouldn't sit well even by 60s standards. Central to controversy were sidekick characters like Joe Jitsu, a martial arts-using Asian caricature, and Go-Go Gomez, a Latino Latin lover stereotype, flashing in fancy wear and broken English. Hemlock Holmes, too, was a British caricature, pompous and bumbling. Collectively, they played into cliched ethnic tropes with exaggerated features and speech patterns. Critics of the era flagged these portrayals as offensive and culturally insensitive. Even for a time when such depictions were widespread, these characters crossed the line. Amid growing awareness of racial and ethnic dignity, spurred on by civil rights movements, the show became a target for condemnation. Censorship followed swiftly. The program was pulled soon after airing. Unlike shows quietly faded by neglect, the Dick Tracy Show faced more direct avoidance. Stations simply stopped carrying it. The characters never gained syndication beyond the initial run. Culturally, its disappearance signaled a fast-emerging sensitivity to ethnic caricatures in children's media. It became a cautionary tale. Even established properties couldn't shield creators from accountability. Later analyses cite the show and discussions of how cartoons both reflect and distort cultural identities. The censorship history remains direct and decisive. No retooling, no edited versions, just a swift retreat from screens. Modern retrospectives often pair it with the censored 11, noting cartoon media's reckoning with racist imagery. In effect, the Dick Tracy Show marks an early turning point. Controversy led to an immediate pull. No disclaimers, only removal. Its impact lies not only in what was shown, but also in how quickly it was deemed unacceptable. Number 13. Wacky Races. The zany antics of Wacky Races, one of Hanna-Barbera's most inventive 1968 offerings, leaped off the screens with high-octane humor and a slew of quirky racers from all walks of life. However, within its manic satire lurked racial and cultural tropes that time would not forget. Some characters embodied ethnic cliches, disguised or exaggerated accents, visual shorthand tied to national stereotypes. While the show's fast-paced gags kept the action light, critics later pointed to portrayals that leaned on comedic shorthand, particularly in characters like Professor Pat Pending, who embodied a mad scientist from nowhere in particular, yet visually toyed with generic foreignness. By the 1970s and 1980s, as cultural representation became a more prominent concern, networks grew uneasy about syndicating episodes with ethnic caricatures, even if minor or part of ensemble chaos. The analogy, harmful comedy can persist even in minor roles, and children absorb these cues. Culturally, Wacky Races remains legendary for creativity, each episode a madcap romp. Yet it also stands as an example of how humor that flirts with stereotypes can be maladaptive. For many fans, rewatches bring nostalgic joy. For critics, an undercurrent of "did you notice that?" misrepresentation. In terms of censorship, rather than full bans, episodes featuring prominent stereotypes saw limited rotation. Some were excluded from compilation packages or streaming collections. Others were edited to remove offending scenes. The show never vanished completely, but foundered in a curated, safe selection. Today, the show's legacy is double-edged, appreciated for its imaginative energy, yet examined through critique. Some modern platforms include content warnings for older episodes featuring cultural caricature, reflecting evolving viewer expectations. Wacky Races demonstrates how even beloved cartoons can undergo selective censorship, partially trimmed rather than entirely erased. Number 12. Batfink. Premiering in 1966, Batfink spoofed superhero tropes with its lead, a chrome-winged vigilante against dastardly villains. Its campy vibe won early fans, but pockets of the world found the show's caricatures of Asian villains, replete with exaggerated accents and mock kung fu, to be deeply offensive. The root of controversy was the stereotyped depiction of karate villains, garish features, speech patterns echoing mockery more than homage, and reductive character design. While the show aimed for humor, these portrayals leaned into mockery of an entire culture. Cultural impact? Minimal in long view, but the controversy reveals how even genre spoofs can slip into hurtful exaggeration. In regions with more sensitivity to Asian stereotypes, some Western European countries, for example, parent groups voiced concerns. In those territories, Batfink faded from television schedules earlier than elsewhere. In the US, the show didn't prompt an immediate all-out ban, but episodes were pulled or edited when sold for later broadcast. Some international distributors replaced offensive scenes or dropped them entirely. Over time, Batfink slipped into obscurity, unearthed by enthusiasts, not for its superhero satire, but as a footnote in problematic representation. Its censorship history is fragmented. No sweeping network directive, but patchwork removal depending on territory. Physically edited tapes, truncated scenes, or entire episodes omitted from TV packages became standard. Looking back, Batfink illustrates the thin line between parody and prejudice. The show's fate underscores that even when cartoonists poke fun at heroics, they must avoid caricaturing real cultures. For today's voiceover, it stands as both comedic artifact and cautionary tale. Number 11. The Ruff and Reddy Show. Debuting in 1957 and running into the early 60s, the Ruff and Reddy Show was Hanna-Barbera's first foray into limited animation. It paired a savvy cat, Ruff, with his lovable but dim-witted canine pal, Reddy, in serialized, sci-fi-laced adventures. On the surface, the show was lighthearted, but time would reveal a problematic undercurrent. In several arcs, Ruff and Reddy visited exotic lands or battled foreign foes, stand-ins for Asian, African, or Middle Eastern cultures. These depictions, meant to inject mystery or comedy, relied heavily on racial caricatures. Oversized lips, slanted eyes, broken English, and tribal stereotypes. Though commonplace at the time, these representations aged poorly. As civil rights conversations entered households, educators and parents alike began scrutinizing media children consumed. By the mid-1970s, syndicated reruns of Ruff and Reddy became targets of complaints. Networks responded not with formal bans, but silent withdrawals. Episodes featuring cultural mockery were removed from rotation, and the show gradually disappeared. Its cultural legacy is complicated. As Hanna-Barbera's first step toward TV cartoon dominance, Ruff and Reddy holds historic weight. Yet, its misuse of cultural identities highlights the dangers of casual stereotyping in children's programming. What passed as comedic filler in the 60s became glaringly offensive by the 80s. Censorship history. Patchy. Entire arcs went missing in some regions, while others aired edited versions. Re-releases skipped those episodes entirely. The show now lives in partial collections, carefully curated to exclude its most controversial content. Today, the Ruff and Reddy Show is seldom discussed except by animation historians. Its quiet removal reflects a broader industry realization. Cartoons aren't immune to accountability. Even the gentlest-looking shows can perpetuate harmful views when creators fail to respect cultural nuance. Number 10. Super President. It sounds like a parody, but Super President was deadly serious. This 1967 cartoon starred a U.S. president who secretly possessed superhuman strength and the power to alter his molecular structure. Fighting villains and disasters in tights, Super President transformed the Oval Office into a superhero's lair. But the controversy wasn't about costume changes or mutant powers, it was about politics. Critics, parents, and even government officials quickly voiced outrage. The idea of a sitting American president donning a cape and moonlighting as a vigilante struck many as absurd, disrespectful, and dangerous. In a decade marked by assassinations and political turmoil, the show was accused of trivializing the presidency during a time when it was anything but. Worse, Super President often ignored diplomacy and due process, instead punching problems into submission. Educators argued that it gave children an unrealistic and authoritarian idea of executive power. Major newspapers and media critics called it one of the most inappropriate cartoons ever aired. NBC stood firm for a short while, defending the show as futuristic fantasy, but the backlash proved too loud to ignore. By early 1968, Super President was pulled from the air, canceled after just one season. It never returned to reruns or syndication. Its cultural impact was strange but significant. While often mocked as so bad it's legendary, it stands as one of the purest examples of political content in children's animation sparking national debate. In later decades, creators cited Super President as a cautionary tale. Mix politics and kids' media too bluntly, and you risk an instant backlash. Censorship here was swift and final. No edits, no disclaimers, just erasure. NBC pulled the plug entirely, and no mainstream outlet ever touched the property again. Today, Super President feels like a fever dream, both too bizarre and too real. But its disappearance reminds us that even cartoons can stir national controversy when they play too close to real power. Number 9. Go Go Gophers. Tucked inside the underdog show, Go Go Gophers premiered in 1968 as a slapstick comedy about two Native American gophers outsmarting bumbling U.S. Army officers. It was pitched as harmless fun, a reversal of the typical cowboys versus Indians trope. But what started as satire quickly devolved into mockery. The Gophers, Running Board and Ruffled Feather, spoke in nonsense syllables and broken English. They wore exaggerated feathered headdresses, grunted absurdly, and were constantly pitted against caricatured white military men. Although the show flipped the power dynamic, it did so by reducing native characters to silly, near-mute clowns. Native American advocacy groups responded with swift condemnation. The show, they argued, didn't celebrate indigenous resilience. It ridiculed it. The fake language and buffoonish antics reinforced harmful stereotypes about intelligence and culture. What some saw as clever reversal, others saw as cultural erasure wrapped in slapstick. Public television networks began quietly dropping Go Go Gophers from syndication by the 1970s. Later generations wouldn't even know the series existed, as VHS and DVD collections skipped over the shorts. It became one of those lost cartoons, buried more by shame than by time. Its cultural impact is subtle, but lasting. Animation historians often cite Go Go Gophers as a pivotal example in early media representation debates. It raised uncomfortable questions. Can satire exist without dignity? Does equal opportunity mockery justify offensive portrayals? Censorship, in this case, came from a mix of grassroots activism and quiet media retreat. There was no formal declaration, just a vanishing act. Stations pulled it from programming blocks. Home releases skipped it. It faded into pop culture obscurity. In retrospect, Go Go Gophers tried to subvert the old Western narrative but stumbled into familiar traps. Its removal marked a growing awareness that even progressive satire can cause harm when creators lack cultural sensitivity. Number 8. The Herculoids. The Herculoids, launched in 1967, was pure sci-fi spectacle. Laser beams, alien beasts, and a family of heroes protecting their planet from invasion. The show thrilled kids with its action-packed sequences and surreal monster designs. But beneath the explosions and space drama lay something darker, an undercurrent of dystopian violence that led to it being quietly pulled from several networks. What drew concern wasn't racism or stereotypes. It was brutality. Unlike the slapstick violence of Looney Tunes, the Herculoids showcased serious, sometimes disturbing combat. Characters were zapped, crushed, disintegrated. Villains often suffered horrific ends without the usual cartoonish bounce back. Parents and psychologists alike began questioning its appropriateness. Critics noted that the series blurred the line between children's fantasy and adult war allegory. Its tone was heavy, sometimes bleak. The heroes, though noble, often acted as judge, jury, and executioner. In an era still reeling from the Vietnam War and growing TV regulation, this hit too close to home. Censorship wasn't immediate, but by the early 70s, stations began editing fight scenes or replacing the show altogether in morning blocks. Some episodes were deemed too intense for young viewers and were never rerun. In later revivals, violence was toned down or framed more cautiously. The cultural impact of the Herculoids remains mixed. It's remembered fondly by genre fans as a bold, ambitious series. Yet media scholars cite it as an early example of cartoon overreach, when style overtook consideration for its audience's age. Its removal wasn't scandalous, but calculated. Networks pivoted to softer, educational programming. The Herculoids slipped quietly into retirement, with some episodes effectively locked in the vault. Ultimately, the show's fate illustrates that censorship isn't always about offense. It can be about intensity. The Herculoids dared to treat kids like grown-ups, and in doing so got pushed back into the shadows. Number 7. The New Casper Cartoon Show. Premiering in 1963, the New Casper Cartoon Show brought the friendly ghost back to television in a format designed for young viewers. While Casper's core message was friendship and innocence, the show stirred quiet controversy in religious communities and was pulled in certain areas for one unexpected reason: the afterlife. Casper's character, though charming, presented an unsettling theological implication. If Casper was once a living boy, what happened to his soul? Was he trapped? Damned? Saved? Though the show never directly addressed this, religious groups, particularly in conservative Christian regions, raised concerns about how death and ghosts were being normalized for children. The unease grew with recurring themes: cemeteries as play spaces, ghosts attending school, and death treated with whimsy. Critics feared this would desensitize children to mortality or mislead them about spiritual beliefs. Some schools even banned discussion of the show, citing confusing religious overtones. Unlike some overtly offensive cartoons, Casper didn't face loud protests or national boycotts. Instead, individual stations pulled it from local lineups, especially in deeply religious areas. Some replaced it with educational programming. Over time, the show's broadcast became scattered and inconsistent. Despite its innocent appearance, Casper became a flashpoint in early debates about spirituality in children's media. His ghostly nature opened philosophical questions, ones the show never answered and likely never intended to. Ironically, its soft tone made the impact more insidious to its critics. Culturally, the show remains a gentle favorite. Yet its quiet removal in certain regions reveals how even the most unassuming cartoons can challenge deeply held beliefs when they wander into metaphysical territory. Casper wasn't censored for what he did, but for what he represented. Number 6. Popeye the Sailor. Syndicated. Though Popeye the Sailor originated in the 1930s, its 1960s television syndication reignited debate about cartoon violence and propaganda. By then, many episodes from earlier decades were being rebroadcast for young viewers, but few realized how racially and culturally offensive some of them were. Episodes created during World War II featured Popeye battling Japanese caricatures, depicted with grotesque features, exaggerated speech, and animalistic behavior. These episodes, once seen as patriotic, had aged into disturbing relics. They included direct wartime propaganda, mocking not only enemy combatants but entire cultures. Other episodes poked fun at Middle Easterners, African tribes, and Native Americans with similar reductive tropes. These weren't isolated cases. They were recurring patterns that peppered the syndicated lineup. By the mid-1960s, television was rapidly evolving, and so was cultural awareness. Advocacy groups flagged Popeye as a problematic presence in Saturday morning schedules. Some stations responded with heavy editing, while others removed entire episodes from rotation. Interestingly, Popeye himself wasn't the problem. His core character, a tough, spinach-loving sailor, remained beloved. But the world around him, populated with racial and cultural stereotypes, was no longer acceptable for public broadcast. Censorship was surgical. Dozens of episodes were cut or shelved. Studios quietly edited dialogue, redrew backgrounds, or added disclaimers in re-releases. Some restored versions excluded entire seasons from availability. Despite the controversy, Popeye survived. His image evolved, and future iterations focused on universal themes of bravery and humor. But those early episodes, they became collector's items, viewed only in private or academic circles. Ultimately, Popeye reveals how legacy characters can carry the weight of their time. Even lovable icons aren't immune to critique when their adventures mirror harmful worldviews. His 1960s run wasn't just a rerun, it was a reckoning. Number 5. Looney Tunes / Merry Melodies / syndicated Looney Tunes defined American animation. From Bugs Bunny to Daffy Duck, these characters were cultural titans. But hidden within their vast library were 11 shorts so offensive they earned a nickname, the Censored 11. Banned from TV and locked in vaults by the late 1960s. These shorts, mostly made in the 1930s and 40s, included Coal Black and a Seven, Dwarfs, Jungle Jitters, and Sunday Go to Meetin' Time. Each relied on grotesque caricatures of Black Americans, often with minstrel show tropes, exaggerated features, and deeply racist humor. As civil rights momentum surged in the 1960s, TV networks began re-evaluating what they aired. These particular Looney Tunes entries, still in circulation on some local stations, sparked immediate backlash. Groups like the NAACP demanded accountability. Warner Brothers eventually responded by pulling the 11 shorts from all future syndication. This wasn't quiet censorship. It was public and permanent. The cartoons became forbidden texts. Educational institutions archived them for historical study, but they were never again shown on mainstream TV. The cultural fallout was significant. The ban raised questions. Should history be erased or exposed and contextualized? While the rest of the Looney Tunes collection remained a staple, these 11 became ghosts in the catalog, rarely discussed but heavily footnoted in animation history. Modern platforms tread carefully. Most streaming services omit the censored 11 entirely. Warner Brothers, to this day, does not officially release them for public consumption. They live on only through bootlegs and academic discussion. Looney Tunes remains a treasured part of childhood, but the existence of these banned shorts reminds us that even beloved classics have shadows. And sometimes, those shadows are best left off the screen. Number 4. The Alvin Show. Premiering in 1961, The Alvin Show brought Ross Bagdasarian's novelty music trio, Alvin, Simon, and Theodore, to television screens with zany animation and catchy tunes. It was a hit with kids, but its early episodes weren't without controversy. In particular, several segments leaned heavily into exaggerated accents and ethnic stereotypes. One episode featured Alvin impersonating an Oriental magician, complete with slanted eyes and broken English. Another lampooned a faux European villain with cartoonishly effeminate mannerisms. These gags were typical of the era, but they quickly became problematic. As the series moved into reruns, complaints began to surface. Advocacy groups noted how ethnic humor, however brief, shaped young viewers' perceptions. By the late 1960s, networks began removing specific episodes or scenes from rotation. The show's syndication became fragmented. Some local stations continued airing the uncut version, while others only showed edited collections. Culturally, the Alvin Show was seen as playful and musical, not mean-spirited. But it suffered from a common blind spot of 1960s animation. Humor derived from lazy caricature. The Chipmunks were safe, but their supporting cast sometimes wasn't. Censorship came in layers. First, small edits. Then, selective syndication. Eventually, the original series gave way to rebooted versions in the 1980s, which erased the earlier show's footprint almost entirely. Today, few remember that the Alvin Show even had a 1960s incarnation, much less that it was once a target of controversy. In the end, the show was less banned than replaced. But its early stumbles show how even well-meaning cartoons must be mindful of what they laugh at, and why. Number 3. The Beanie and Cecil Show. Premiering in 1962, The Beanie and Cecil Show combined slapstick humor with satirical jabs at pop culture and politics. Created by Bob Clampett, this cartoon had an unusual blend of child-friendly characters, like the innocent Beanie and the brave sea serpent Cecil, and baiting adult references. But its playful exterior masked a deeper controversy. At the heart of the backlash were episodes mocking Eastern cultures, complete with exaggerated Asian accents, Fu Manchu imagery, and caricatures of foreign leaders. In one segment, a villain named Dishonest John disguises himself as a Chinese warlord with stereotypical features and voice, playing on Cold War fears. It didn't help that the show aired during a time of heightened U.S. tension with communist nations. While the cartoon poked fun at everyone, including politicians and media moguls, its portrayals of non-Western cultures veered from satire into mockery. The line between clever parody and racial insensitivity blurred, and that's where the trouble began. Complaints surfaced from Asian American advocacy groups and educators. Some stations began selectively airing episodes, while others pulled the show altogether. The backlash intensified with the 1988 reboot, which leaned even harder into controversial humor. That revival was short-lived and faced immediate cancellation. Over time, the original Beanie and Cecil faded from syndication. Episodes featuring racial caricatures were rarely re-aired, and the show slipped into semi-obscurity. Yet its animation style and musical charm are still praised by historians and animators. Ultimately, the Beanie and Cecil Show reminds us that even smart, creative animation can be undercut by harmful tropes. Its removal wasn't just about isolated jokes. It was about recognizing when cleverness becomes cruelty. Number 2. Tom and Jerry, 1960s syndication. While Tom and Jerry originated in the 1940s, it remained a staple of 1960s television through syndication. And that's where the controversy truly began. To many, the cat and mouse chases were innocent fun. But look closer, and the problematic content becomes impossible to ignore. Chief among the controversies was Mammy Two Shoes, an African-American maid portrayed with exaggerated dialect, never shown fully on screen, but voiced with heavy racial stereotypes. This character appeared in multiple shorts aired during the 60s, a time when civil rights movements were reshaping public discourse. Other episodes showed blackface gags, cannibal caricatures, and inappropriate wartime references. One episode even depicted Tom playing a Native American in a war bonnet, complete with a feathered headdress and nonsensical chants. While children laughed at the chaos, critics raised alarms. Civil rights groups and watchdog organizations demanded the removal of racially insensitive content. Studios initially tried to salvage the situation by redubbing Mammy's voice with a less stereotypical accent, but the damage had been done. By the late 60s and early 70s, Several episodes were permanently pulled from broadcast packages. Others were heavily edited. Later DVD and Blu-ray releases came with disclaimers or omitted the most offensive shorts entirely. Culturally, the legacy of Tom and Jerry remains complex. Their silent, slapstick genius inspired generations of animators. But the racial baggage in the background lingers. For many viewers, it was a betrayal, a beloved show that slipped in painful stereotypes under the radar. Today, Tom and Jerry is still shown, but with a curated list of episodes. And those problematic cartoons? They live on only in academic discussions and rare archival footage, a testament to how deeply censorship can shape the memory of a franchise. Number 1. The Bugs Bunny Show, 1960s broadcasts. At the very top of the list sits The Bugs Bunny Show, one of the most iconic cartoon programs in American history, yet also one of the most heavily censored. Though Bugs Bunny remains a cultural titan, his earliest adventures are filled with scenes so offensive they've been hidden from public view for decades. Originally airing in prime time in 1960 before moving to Saturday mornings, the show recycled Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies shorts, some dating back to the 1930s. This is where the trouble began. Viewers weren't just getting Bugs' best, they were also getting some of his worst. Episodes aired in the 60s included blackface gags, Nazi satire, racial slurs, and grotesque portrayals of Japanese and black characters. Bugs sometimes disguised himself in Oriental garb, exaggerated accents, and even donned offensive costumes for laughs. While these gags may have seemed of their time, by the late 1960s, they were undeniably outdated and offensive. Complaints poured in from parents, educators, and civil rights groups. The show was yanked from certain time slots, and eventually, entire shorts were removed from circulation. Warner Brothers compiled a list of cartoons it would never air again, the infamous Censored 11 among them, and the Bugs Bunny Show became a patchwork of edited material. Yet, despite all this, Bugs Bunny endured. His character evolved with the times, shedding the racism and war propaganda for more universal comedy. But the legacy of those banned shorts looms large. They serve as a stark reminder of how even the most beloved icons can be built on troubling foundations. Modern re-releases come with disclaimers or skip over the worst content. And some of those original episodes, they haven't aired in decades, and likely never will again. Bugs may have outlasted the key. Controversy, but he didn't escape it. And there you have it. 15 cartoons from the 1960s that were loved, laughed at, and ultimately pulled from TV. A reminder that animation reflects the culture that creates it. If you enjoyed this dive into controversial cartoon history, like, subscribe, and tell us which banned classic shocked you most.